Welcome to Fringe Pop 321, the show that believes the world is stranger than we think, but thinking should not be strange. We are back once again with Dr. Judd Burton and Dr. Aaron Judkins, and we're talking about Göbekli Tepe. And let's get into imagery. The fancy word is iconography, things that people carve, artistic representations of this or that. What are some of the images at Göbekli Tepe, and how do they lead archaeologists and scholars to think about what deities might be in view? Because we've talked about sort of a religious impulse. There's this cultural transition that, again, in the ancient Near Eastern world widely, not just biblical stuff and Enoch, but Mesopotamia, that transition is somehow related to supernatural influence, okay, just broadly speaking. So what deities might the people at Göbekli Tepe have had in mind or in view by virtue of the artistic stuff that they've left us?
The iconography there at Göbekli Tepe is really interesting. Most of it is anamorphic. It's zoomorphic. It's images of animals, vultures, scorpions, a lot of snakes.
No game, interestingly enough.
No
foxes.
Game. Really? That is interesting.
They're all predatory.
Right. Exactly. These creatures are things that can bite you and sting you and harm you, in some way, shape, or form. It's very similar, I think, to the imagery that we see, across other cultures later on. The parallel is interesting because if you look at Egypt, King Tut, when they found him, he was wearing a double crown. This was the serpent and the vulture. Now, Egyptologists would tell you that's a representation of his rule over Egypt.
Upper and
Lower Egypt. But I think the symbolism tells us a different story. And that is that the vulture representing death, but the serpent was representing life or the wisdom giver. In that ancient concept of the cosmos. This is something that we see also at Göbekli Tepe, is that these animals, I think, are in essence representations of a particular strength of that animal, or a guardian of that animal, if you will, over the site, hence why they could harm, bite, or sting you. Probably something that would help ward off, the evil spirits, or something that would come in that they believe would be, a bad influence over that site. But specifically on Eastern Pillar 19 and Western Pillar 31, these now the archaeologist isn't going to tell you these are deities, but I think they are. One is a representation of a crescent moon on its back. This is up around where the head would be, up around the neck area. And then one is the disk of a sun. It don't have the rays of the sun, but the disk itself is representing the sun. And then on, I think, Western Pillar 31 is a representation of a bull cranium. Now, this is an ancient representation of a auroch skull, of a bull skull. Now, these bulls were not like we see here in Texas, even though we got longhorn steers and they're huge. These animals were much larger. And so these, I think, are representations of deities in the fact that they're represented on the two anthropomorphic figures centered in the central pillar of enclosure D. And they mean something because they're carved in stone up around the neck area. I think this is a representation of the moon and the sun over the power of the heavens, the God and the deity of the heavens and the cosmos. The auroch would represent, in the ancient mind, strength and vitality. This is something that would be a natural symbolism for this auroch bull. When you took down a bull, you didn't do it by yourself. It took probably a group of strong men to go out and take down one of those bulls. We see that the people at even Çatalhöyük in the Neolithic are called people of the bull. And there's a lot of imagery of the auroch skulls, even in people's homes at Çatalhöyük.
It's brought into the domestic sphere.
It's brought into their actual homes. And so,
it's a fecundity issue as well.
Yes, but it's a power issue too, as Aaron pointed out, and that the symbol of, although the aurochs was a large megafauna, the symbol of the bull as a symbol of supernatural power remained an important symbol throughout the Mediterranean and the ancient Near East, and later
it continues even into Enoch. Whenever I hear of auroch, I think some of the later, first Enoch 90, I believe, where you have the vision with the auroch and the bulls. It's messianic.
Yeah.
So it's very clearly, this power, strength, majestic, sort of imagery.
Well, it's the same thing that they're even representing here, is the strength and the vitality. It's all a representation of masculinity at Göbekli Tepe. Even though there's some representation of not just vitality, but life and death. This is a circle of life of we believe in a life here physically, but we believe in an afterlife, in a cosmos, and I think these deities are tying into that. The gods of the heavens, the god of the auroch bull in the earth, and then the representation of this of the people, these anthropomorphic images that had probably a symbol of power or rulership or guardianship over these. But there was a lost connection, as we said earlier, and I think they were using the spirits, perhaps the watcher influence, and the representation of these animals and the deities to try to reconnect something that they had lost before. And I think that goes back to the Garden of Eden.
I got a couple, and the Cosmic Mountain would ultimately go back to there as well. I have a couple questions, and I don't know if either of them are answerable. Because so little of the site is actually excavated. But the first one would be, this is probably impossible to answer, but when I hear that there's no game, okay, so it's very normal that you would pick an aggressive animal, like to be a protector kind of symbol thing. But you also have this life-death thing. Some of them are predators, but some of them are also, again, life symbols. Do these occur in zones? And what I mean by that is, are there places on this site where there's a clustering of one or the other?
I think personally, just from looking at the evidence, that has yet to be determined, because the site is just so massive. Yeah. There's so much of it, just quantitatively, that has not been either excavated or assessed.
And I'm not surprised by that answer. The second thing is, I brought up archaeoastronomy before, and again, I realize this isn't Stonehenge, but has anybody actually looked at the site from that angle? In other words, do the pillars, the one that you're arguing is one's life, one's death, rising of the sun, setting of the sun, or something like that, are they oriented at all? To either something on the outside, like where the sun would rise and set.
I think there's some that's done some work on that suggests, perhaps hypothesizing that they are aligned in some way. I don't know if that's coincidence or if that's deliberate. We don't have enough information yet to make that determination, I don't think. But it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, we see this in ancient archaeoastronomy everywhere. I mean, this is, of course, Stonehenge made that famous, but the Egyptians and the pyramids and alignments to Orion's belt. It's definitely wouldn't be surprising if they did. To do it on that scale, I think, would be just massive.
Yeah, and considering that, the way that many ancient and prehistoric peoples learned engineering was by taking those higher mathematics from learning the movements of the stars. I would say that there's a more than promising chance that you're going to find, as the ongoing archaeoastronomic research goes on, that you're going to find these alignments and connections.
Yeah, and our viewers should know that is not a far-fetched idea. You used higher math. Okay, here's how you do higher math with the sun. You take a stick, you stick it in the ground, okay, and you just like draw a line in the sand. Okay, this was the angle where the sun came up this morning. The next day it's going to be an inch a little over, and you just mark them, and after a while you start counting. Okay.
Yeah.
And you get this this cycle that's divisible neatly in quadrants or what. It's really not that complicated, but since we don't learn math that way, we think, oh, come on. Higher math, they're not sitting there with Texas Instruments, calculators, and then, no, that isn't what we're talking about. We're talking about just mathematical concepts, that are very easily trackable in the natural world. And this is why archaeoastronomy is a big deal.
Well, and it could represent, a particular function. If that turns out to be true, it could represent a particular function in a gateway, perhaps, at Göbekli Tepe, because this, again, goes back to a cosmos ideology of life after death, which I believed that they fully were aware of that. Why would they come to this site from far away? Why would they create stone masks and these anthropomorphic figures? It could have been that they were going to this site maybe once or twice a year, particularly in the midsummer, perhaps in August or both, where the seasons of the wheat harvest and the barley would be ready for harvest, if you will. It's wild. It's not cultivated yet, but it's there. And if you can bring in a lot of people, well, there's your food source. There's your wild or bulls that you get. There's a water source, although it's 3 miles away. Perhaps it wasn't that great of a distance for them. But why would they be doing this? And I think it gets back to the question of these deities represented on the pillars and a connection with their forefathers or their ancestors, if you will, who probably in some representation are passing through either through the stones or have passed on in remembrance of looking at the stones as a way of kind of putting them into a remembrance of a state that we know where our forefathers came from, and they came from the heavens.
Yeah.
And this goes back to probably the Watcher influence of we're going back into the cosmos, perhaps in a gateway of some sort, and the archaeological alignments perhaps would probably attest to that, because they would be pointing to or aligning to, if you will, a particular in a particular way that would point to one of these stars, just like the Egyptians did,
if that
in
were,
a way to go back to the cosmos.
If that were ever demonstrated, that would really be shocking, because, on the one hand, let's just take Egypt. This was not a democratized idea. There's a reason why you have these pyramid alignments and the burial chambers and all this stuff, because that's where pharaohs go.
Right.
Okay, pharaohs go back to the stars because they rejoin the gods. They're the incarnation of Horus, and so when they die, they go back, to their real forefathers, which are the gods. But that wasn't everybody.
No.
That was a small subset of the population.
Yeah.
So if you ever had a situation where people in groups that there's no discernible kingship hierarchy.
Yeah.
And they, in the Neolithic period, en masse, are thinking this way. That would be dramatically different. That would draw a lot of attention.
But I think it's under development at this time. Just, going back to what we talked about, the things that have to be in place, for city-states to operate the way they do. And I think that the Watchers sort of set that tone. And also commenting on what Aaron pointed out, about this being, a gateway. Even the, Schmidt and the others who have worked on the project for decades, at this point in time, will all come to the same conclusion that the people that built this believed that it was a portal to the netherworld. They believed that it was some sort of a gateway.
Right. Not necessarily the negative gates to hell.
But it was
the afterlife.
If we want to put it in
transitional
right,
point.
the afterlife. It does represent this transition, or if we want to bring it into the quantum age, it's some sort of multi-dimensional.
What just pops into my head here is that there's a lot of hay made over the fact that this, like the Sumerian king list, okay, is really has a lot of, I would say significant parallels, to Genesis 1 through 5. Okay, I mean it's probably overblown, but there's at least some good parallels there. But one of the major differences is that the pre-flood persons in the biblical list are not kings. Everywhere else it's kings, that have this special relationship with the Apkallu, like on the Sumerian Mesopotamian side. On the biblical side, you've got, normal people, who have this, again, sense of God and afterlife, and, Enoch walks with God, and, they have this sense, and you don't have to attach it to a special subclass of individual. It does sound more democratized when you look at the absence. It's not tied to kingship at all.
Well, perhaps, they considered their ancestors, in a way, deifying their ancestors, perhaps.
That is actually
Noah
much more
even.
common.
They got two big masculine type of T-stone pillars. Why? Because I think they're perhaps deifying their ancestors, and they're going back to remember that, or it's perhaps a gateway of some sort that they're trying to get access to. And
even if it's just a recognition, okay, the gods have power over life and death.
Yeah.
Gosh, we wish, this wasn't the end. In these really simple thoughts.
Our colleague Derek Gilbert suggests the ancient Kipsum. This is a monthly ritual of feeding the dead. They buried the dead under their houses, and then every month you pull that person out, that family member out, and then you would feed them bread, or it's not it's a foreign concept to our mindset, but that's what they did because they felt like they were taking care of them in the afterlife.
You're remembering them. You haven't stopped caring about them. You're still it's a dumb word, but maintaining.
It's a concept of, hey, we're remembering you in the afterlife, and we're helping you along.
We're still taking care of you.
And even though we don't find burials at Göbekli Tepe, it could be something very similar in that they're going back and remembering their ancestors who perhaps they've even deified. So it's a very interesting concept of why they would build these enclosures, and they're all different. A, B, C, and D, they're all different. And I believe they could have had very different functions. You would go into one perhaps and do some kind of ritual. You go into another for another purpose. But it's back in the Neolithic, 25 years of research have shown us now that in the Neolithic period, there is a separation of communal space and sacred space. And this space is definitely something that we see throughout the region. Not just at Göbekli Tepe, but others. There's a separate space, and this is what I think is a sacred space of some kind of a ritualistic purpose that they're gathering for.
Well, when we come back, this is, again, another good point of transition, because whenever you talk about places that are perceived to have some connection from the transition of life to death, and again, we would use terms like afterlife for that. But whenever you talk about those places, you invariably get this vocabulary of, like portal, gateway, this sort of thing. And what you guys mean by that is going to be different than what somebody else out there on the internet or on TV are going to mean by that. So when we come back, we want to talk about how this has sort of been co-opted and I'll use the A word, abused, in sort of the ancient alien paradigm, as against some of the paradigm that you guys are sort of sketching out here. So we'll get into that when we come back. Thanks again for watching Fringe Pop 321. Please watch our other videos. We're here to help you learn to think well about things in the ancient world and things that are strange as well. Please go to our website, fp321.com, for more information, for good resources on how to do just that, because what you know may not be so.